Before I open the discussion to the floor, I'd like to invite just two contributions, two interventions from people on the floor who have specific insights that we have asked them to share with us today. Could I ask Laura first from Pave Point?
Hello everybody, my name is Laura Pohjalainen and I work at Pave Point Travel and Roma Centre with the Violence Against Women programme. Thank you very much for having us here just to present on our this year's 16 Days of Action campaign. Every year Pave Point campaigns around the issue of violence against Traveller and Roma women. And more over the past few years we've been focusing on engaging with men on the issue because, you know, too often we don't do that. So we've run a pilot programme with a group of Traveller men who came to a conclusion that men in general do not talk about violence against women. It's seen as women's issue. So the group of Traveller men really wanted to do something about it, and based on that we created our 16 Days of campaign called Break the Silence. And it's really a group of Traveller men who come together, breaking the silence and speak up on the issue of violence against women. It's our first very step on progressing the work with Traveller and Roma men on the issue. And the campaign runs throughout the 16 Days of Action. On our Twitter page at Pave Point and on Pave Point Facebook page. We would really appreciate if people can share it and help us break the silence on men's violence against women. And thank you again just for having us here to present on some of our work on the issue. Thanks.
Thank you. And the other intervention is Ellen right at the back from the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre.
Good morning, thank you very much, and it's great to be here this morning. I know Orla knows that I'm like a broken record about this, but what we absolutely need is a second Savvy report, Sexual Abuse and Violence in Ireland. It was the most comprehensive piece of research ever done on attitudes and beliefs to sexual violence in Ireland. It told us that over a lifetime, 200,000 Irish women were victims of rape, the second most serious crime in our statute books. Now that is an absolute, it's a crisis, and 60,000 Irish men were victims of rape. During these raising awareness on violence against women, the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre has been involved in a campaign on raising awareness about consent, Orla said, and she's right, it's really important that we have a definition of consent in our new legislation. And we do hope that anybody here who is in a position to help us to support the position of including a definition of consent, we would really appreciate it, but also supporting a second Savvy report, because unless we have a second piece of research to do the comparison, we will not know whether or not the escalation in the people coming to avail of the services of rape crisis centres around the country is as a result of an escalation in the crime, or whether more people are feeling confident now that they will be coming forward and will be believed. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, there is one more. I apologies. I'm not sure who.
Sure, my name's Orla Murphy. I'm here kind of two hats on today. I'm here from the Irish Red Cross and also as the Irish Youth Delegate to the UN. Okay. So I guess when we went to the UN, there was a big focus on the Sustainable Development Goals Summit, and you know, Malala Yousafzai was there on the day, and we all stood beside her as the voice of youth. And you know, one of the UK youth delegates said the problem with Malala is she's an example, but she's not the exception. And I think that was quite interesting, because there seemed to be a disconnect between the fact that this is ongoing every day. There's the victims of acid attacks in India, FGM victims in Sudan, and that is a little bit of a disconnect. I think we feel as youth that sensationalized stories are easy to understand. However, the link is missing between casual discrimination in everyday lives. You know, we look at pop culture. I think one very jarring example of that was actually at the Global Citizen Festival, which was a celebration at the SDGs. And, you know, Malala came out and said her piece and, you know, promoted SDG 5. And a few minutes later, Beyonce came out in leotards that seemed to shrink throughout her performance. And, you know, this was also in the promotion of the global goals. So I think that, you know, throughout pop culture, it's always been, you know, a challenge and a struggle. But I do think that, you know, as young people, we need to, you know, challenge injustices. And we actually had a round table with Ravi Karkara, the Deputy Executive Director of UN Women. And, you know, he opened up the floor, he set up a WhatsApp group that everyone is welcome to join to pitch in on this, because he wants to bring this outside of forums such as this, which are wonderful, but, you know, at the same time, they're not accessible to everybody who don't have the means to be here, you know, who perhaps aren't engaged as much as they'd like to be. Whereas it's forums such as WhatsApp, and I know that, you know, Dominic earlier mentioned that social media has been used for bad, but it can be used for good. And I think it really is. Ravi, you know, spoke about challenging injustices from toddlers up, that when boys reach adolescence, it's actually too late, that they're part of the patriarchy at that stage. And I think as young people, and especially young girls actually at the UN, you know, I think the oldest girl there was 24, and we found it actually so jarring to see kind of, you know, little indiscretions and little discriminations casually thrown in as we were going about our days there. And I think that that isn't something that can be changed in, you know, forums like this. That has to be changed, you know, on social media, just generally asking boys why they phrase something like that. And, you know, I think it's also the use of language around women, and it's, you know, the use of words feisty or strong women, which, you know, really the connotation there is every other woman is weak. So I think it's language around that, you know, racial and homophobic slurs are considered totally obscene, yet there's no kind of, you know, it's maybe disrespectful is the strongest term we'd use for language which is demeaning to women. So I think maybe that from a youth perspective is how we can challenge it at grassroots level, because campaigns are fantastic, but campaigns, you know, aren't long-lived. And it was fantastic that Emma Watson granted her voice to the He for She campaign, but I think perhaps her message didn't go far beyond the viral video. And the pledge is fantastic, but it's consistent engagement and consistent challenging of everyday injustices, I think, from a youth perspective is what we're looking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Orla. And sorry, I didn't have you on my list. I'm sorry for ignoring you. It's actually great to hear the youth voice in particular, and the consortium is trying to do what you're saying, generate awareness as outside of meetings like this. And I think indicative of that, the partners that the consortium has here today are not just the National Women's Council, but also the National Youth Council. And that does meet the boys and girls scenario that Anthony was talking about and that you mentioned there specifically. I'd now like to open it up to the floor, and already I've seen hands. So can I start at the very back with Joan, and I'll come up to you then, okay? But
Thank you, Brian. I just wanted to answer the question that I'd been asked before question and answer starts. And I apologise for not being ready for the question. The contact and the person is Javinder Sangara, and the organisation, if you Google, is Karma Nirvana, and I'll spell that just in case, Karma, and then Nirvana. And they have been supporting for a number of years young women and girls, victims and survivors of forced marriage. And if you go Google that site, you'll find a number of press entries which talk about the spoons and the wearing of spoons and underwear as a way of combating the travelling of the girls, and indeed the need for training of all, both police and security officials. What I can't find for you is the origin of how to get the hold of the spoons, which is not on the site, and I'll try and follow that up
okay,
later.
And if you let us have it, if you do find it, we can make sure.
I will. I'm sorry, I haven't managed that. Thank you.
Okay, there are just a couple of rows ahead. The mic is coming to you now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Salome Mbugua, and I work with Akidwa and also Wezesha. I just actually wanted to say that I'm very grateful that we are now engaging men, because this has been my question for so many years. And coming to this now and seeing the consortium very interested in engaging men, it's really a bonus. We started engaging men in 2010 in Akidwa, and again it was because of our work mainly on gender-based violence. When we invited women to come for training or for seminars, they went back home and they were beaten because of coming for the meeting. And so we felt that really not engaging men, we are losing, and we started from then. We had many sessions. And just what I wanted to say here is actually on the whole issue of bringing the issue right home. We have 3,780 women living in Ireland who have gone through female genital mutilation. We are grateful that we have a service now, which is actually led by Irish Family Planning Association, and it's funded by the Irish government through the HSC. So that's something which is there because the women need support. But we also need to engage with these women and people coming from other countries who are living here now. And having a service like that, I think it's important. But one of the key things that was said by men, during the time of meeting, was that they need to have the women with them when they're engaging about issues of violence against women and those discussions. My final actually thing that I want to bring to the meeting is that it's very important that we also engage all men, regardless of the issues that we are dealing with. For example, for us in Akidwa, we so much engaged African men. But actually one of the men who contacted me was an Irish man who was very concerned about a woman that he had actually married who had gone through female genital mutilation. I think we need to open up when we are discussing this issue. We need to enlighten ourselves also with issues that are not very, we don't find them very attractive, to discuss, especially issues of female genital mutilation. But really to know that we have those issues right home here in Ireland when we talk about them. And the need to engage the migrant men and women as well when you're discussing these issues. Thank you.
Okay. Anthony, just that comment, could I ask you, do you engage men and women together on your courses around, or do you do gender specific?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah, we promote a partnership approach. So we feel that not only is it important for the intersex dialogue to take place and women hearing from men about their socialization process, men hearing from women about their socialization process, the different challenges, I think that conversation really helps them stop saying, we focus too much on the differences between the sexes, which most of them are socially composed, if not all of them. And we focus a lot less on how actually we are alike. We're all humans, we all have the same dreams, the same needs, but we've been told we achieve them in different ways. And when you really get into that space, it's really magical sometimes how much that connection is realized really quickly. We do feel that there are specific issues / moments where the segregation of work is necessary. Definitely for women working through the trauma of gender-based violence, it is not yet at a place where inviting men into a room would be conducive to her, because we need to see that essentially as a trauma that she's still going through. Similarly, men who have abusive behaviors, that is usually a choice of the woman, whether she wants to be in the room or around him while we work with him. And sometimes when we're beginning to engage men, at the very beginning of the process, we might have a session alone with men. Okay. Or when we're talking about issues such as sexual issues, they might feel comfortable alone at first, but the work is rather incomplete unless they can talk about it, again, with women in the room and with women directly, because we really feel like not only is that important, but the process of seeing women as equals that you can discuss these issues with, that is the learning underneath the learning, that's essential to the way that we work.
Okay, thank you. There's a woman here in red.
Thank you. My name is Coach Keane. I'm a senator in Oireachtas Éireann, and I come here today to support you in the work you're doing, and indeed the broken record Eileen O'Malley Dunlop down there, who has been for years campaigning for, against the Proud Rape Crisis Centre and violence against women. And indeed, my own maiden speech in the Seanad when I was elected was on female genital mutilation, a bill that was brought in May 2012. Well, this was the first speech I had was in 2011 when I was elected to the Seanad. And female genital mutilation, as you know now, is outlawed since May 2012. And indeed, anybody who facilitates anybody bringing people abroad for female genital mutilation as well. Now, I say that in the context of women in politics as well, because I know when the bill was going through, it was mostly women who spoke on it. The very few women, we have only 18% women in the Dáil, and if you were watching the Claire Byrne live show on women in politics, we brought in the 30% quota, because I don't care what anybody says, we have a left brain and a right brain, and we need both. We need men and we need women, but we need both sectors of society to work together. I want to go back to Anthony, because I think what he said is the most important, is where we start with the children. I have many trainings in life, be it from community development to teacher, but my most important training was Montessori training. And in that, exactly what Anthony said was, from the womb, basically how you bring up children and how you treat children. Only this year we passed legislation, again brought forward by a woman. I know Minister James Riley implemented it, but the seed was sown. But on the removal of reasonable chastisement and smacking children in the home. Now 15 years ago, and we have seen it outlawed that violence against adults or force against adults is outlawed, but it was still legal, and until this year, only last month, October 2015. So that's 3 things that this government has done that I think, and you do need governments to help the voluntary organisations like yours who are campaigning on the issues for years, but proactive activity has come, and on those 3 issues I mentioned, it has been women that has been proactive in bringing it forward. I have no hesitation in saying it. I do say, and I've always said it, I was against quotas. We do need the men to work with the women. We do need the women to work for the men, but we also need, and I think the main, I don't know who spoke about, we have to involve the men. The men are involved, but it is, attitudes I think have to change. And again, when I was listening to Claire Byrne live on television on women in politics, I said, my God, attitudes are changing very slowly. It would take 250 years to get women into politics, and that's why I changed my mind on the quotas. If we just waited for it to happen by slowly changing attitudes, we have to put down and lay the law down there for quotas. And I want to congratulate you and indeed the Women's Council as well for organising today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. There's a lady here in black and red just in front of you. Come.
At the risk of sounding like the broken record that was referred to there, when people of my generation hear conversations like this, there is an enormous, irresistible urge to say, if I were to close my eyes, I could imagine this conversation taking place 20, even, I'll admit it, 30 years ago. And so there's so much that's talked about in theory. There's so much that's talked about what we need. We need an end to discrimination. We need shelters. We need legislation. Those are all matters which require someone to do something. And it's been my experience over the years that those steps will not be taken until there is not just carrot, but a lot of stick and a lot of willingness to progress. What I was most interested in all of the speakers, and to listen to somebody here beside me who's a youth speaker, it made me really feel this issue of nothing changing in a 30-year period, or more indeed. But what I find most interesting to hear is Anthony's work from the core and from on the battlefront, as it were, with his workshops, and so eloquently to speak about the need to engage men. And that indeed was part of the conversation, if I were to close my eyes, that took place 30 years ago. We, in the Women's Political Association, and other groups that I was involved with here, had been chanting that many, many years ago, but it never happened. You mentioned, Anthony, in your course of your very fine presentation to us, about privilege. And of course we know that there are certain societies and ethnicities that bring that privilege as part of their own culture forward. So that, to me, would be almost an iron wall through which we could never get. But I would be really interested to hear from you, Anthony, when you worked with those men and when you have engaged and gone back, were there any breakthroughs? Were there any results? Were there any moments when you felt that you could, even in the context of people who would traditionally have taken these matters as pure privilege, where they would be willing to look at things a different way?
Thank you. Anthony, can I pass?
Yeah, sure. Okay, first I just want to talk about when the Ms. Senator, I'm sorry, I'm so bad with technical
it's okay,
titles.
It's fine, Senator.
When you spoke about work with children, this really brings to mind when we specifically talk about gender, that the stereotypes are not descriptive, they're prescriptive. And I know that many people already know that, but one of the studies that first opened my eyes before I really got into gender was a study of social psychology where 2 babies of the exact same weight, exact same complexion, I think it might have even been the same baby, was placed in blue or pink, And then quotes from different parents or different people observing the child would give what they thought about, what they could tell about the child thus far. And if it was blue or it was a baby boy, it was strong, tough, very healthy, big, and all of these other words that we used to describe. And if it was in pink, a baby girl, it was sweet, kind, very, very, like, all of these terms that we typically associate. It was a baby. They had none of these qualities. It probably had all of the above. But it's from the very beginning, and this brings us back to things like self-fulfilling prophecy. So when I treat a person like they are less than me, they will begin to believe that they are less than me, and in actuality I will have created the reality that I had thought of that was unfounded in the first place. And we continue to do this with men and women. So we continue to tell men, again, going back, you shouldn't cry, you shouldn't cry, you shouldn't cry. And then when they get older, we're surprised about how men are unable to communicate their emotions. And for some reason, we're making a disconnect between everything that they have been told their entire lives and everything that they're doing. The same thing with women. And this is especially important because when we talk about patriarchy and we talk about masculinities, again, masculinities does not mean only working with men. We do a lot of masculinities work with women, and we do a lot of femininities work with men, because a mutual understanding is needed, because women also, in many instances, can create the patriarchal norms that we're talking about. In my culture, in my society, many times it is the mother or the mother-in-law who will dictate a lot of the patriarchal norms that the boys are raised under. Again, that's not putting blame on women. That's putting blame on any time we hear the same patriarchal diction being brought out and our children being raised in that manner. Then maybe a touch on how that goes to quota. I too was at first ignorantly against a quota, and I say ignorantly about myself, not anyone else who is against the quota, but any kind of positive discrimination, I thought that in and of itself was an irony, and I didn't quite understand it until I learned more about, there are many different types of quotas. So we need to make more education and make more awareness about the different types of quotas that we're talking about, because sometimes people put it in very simplistic terms, and when we do that, we almost do an injustice to the work that is brought out about what we're trying to do. But secondly, maybe to pull on something that several people have mentioned today, if you did not have a man like your president, who we believe is a positive role model for men, men wouldn't have an alternative to look at when they're trying to deviate from something like a very patriarchal model of what a man should be. So when they have a man who speaks up about social injustice, who's for peace, who stands up for the rights of all people in the society, then they can say, I want to be that type of a man. But we need to forcefully sometimes create those type of role models for little girls in a system that does not make it easy for women to get into a world of politics. Again, right from the beginning, you're not given political text and told, oh, who's going to be a president when they grow old? You're given baby dolls, told about how beautiful you can look, etc., etc. Very general, not overgeneralizing towards all women, but generally this is the trend. And I think that those things are important because it's so essential that little girls can look up to women as leaders who can make substantial and significant change and have those be their aspirations. About privilege, this is when I spoke about transformative change, maybe it's because I come from a background of psychology, maybe it's because I had to go through my own process. Privilege, when you're a man or when you're from a privileged community, is not apparent. It's not apparent to you. You assume that this is just the way of things. Yes, I would be the head of the household because I'm a man and that's what men do. That's the way my father was, that was the way my grandfather was, that's what you see around you. And so the work on that needs to be very much, okay, when we tackle it, we also try to take a look at the negative aspects of that privilege. So, and this is how we say that working with men on masculinities towards gender equality is beneficial towards men. It's a win-win. This is the most beautiful thing about that process. It needs to be woman-focused, but working on any issue that's important to women will be beneficial to men. So you do that if you want to talk about decision-making in the household, right, as an example. Or we can actually make it more relevant, violence in the household. When you're questioning men about the violence, you ask them, okay, well, what do you think was a result of the violence? Did she understand your perspective, or is she just afraid? No, she's just afraid. All right, well, do you think that that is actually going to get across what you were thinking? Did you actually listen to her? What's the relationship like with you? Are you very stressed? Do you think you'd be acting this violent if you're not stressed? Yes, I'm very stressed. Well, what do you do when you're stressed? And you get down to the nitty-gritty that the patriarchal gender roles that we've set for women and men have advantages and disadvantages in many different ways. Men typically have a lot of disadvantages when it comes to mental health and when it comes to physical health. And those are a lot of the ways that we begin to tap into how the privilege is actually not a privilege at all, how that's actually something that's working against them, how that it's very unhealthy that they don't communicate their emotions, how it's very unhealthy that they don't feel like they can talk to anyone, how essentially their spouse is their partner in life who they're not even benefiting from the partnership. But that goes both ways. And it's a slow process where, again, we talk about empathy because you also need the person to, they're in a privileged position. And in my case, it's not court mandated. They don't have to be there. So you also have to be you have to have an unconditional positive regard, despite the fact that you don't agree with the actions and you want to try to make that apparent to them. So that's why I also said sometimes the process has to be slow. We can't assume that changing these things are going to happen overnight. And yeah, it's definitely, this is where I also feel that male privilege, patriarchy, violence should always be at the center of the work that we do in masculinities, because it's not easy. Because if it's not easy, it actually probably means that that's exactly where we should be working more and sharing more and learning more, and hopefully, I mean, the only place I might disagree with you is the fact that I'm sitting up here today, and the fact that it has become more of a global issue means that the conversations that you were having 30 years ago had much more of an impact than maybe you feel. And I mean, that's very important. Sometimes it doesn't happen as quickly as we would like, but as long as it's happening and we continue learning, I think that's a good thing. So.
Okay, thank you. There's a woman here in black in front, thank you, and then Jim afterwards.
Carmel Urandus from World Vision Ireland. I wanted to thank you for this morning's program, because I think that we were able today to see that whether we like it or not, we see men in this context, in this discourse, we're moving it from perpetrators to partners. And so we see that actually to end gender-based violence, we cannot do it only with women. It has to be with men. If we take humanity as one bird, one wing is the man, the other wing is the woman, we can see that the two wings need to be, they're not copy-pasted, but they need to be balanced for this bird to fly. But I wanted to bring back this idea of a social constructed role that society has been putting for centuries over centuries on men's role, and as you really explained very clearly, how they have been shaped into this mold. But I wanted to say also that women, and reshift a bit when it says standing up, speaking out, more and more emphasis on women actually, because we have been also, and no matter where we're from or what social background we are, or racial background or religious background, we all have been molded as women also, as a woman, so with everything that it entails. So I wanted to bring back the focus also on, for women in the world to standing up and speaking out. Why? Because we know that women are the primary care, and they're the ones who gave the primary education to children. And so how we would like to, do you remember the story, I think, of Mr., the CEO from Concern, who was sharing with us the story of this little girl who was asked, what is it that you want to become? And she looked at her mom and she said, I want to get married. But the truth is that what would happen if this woman would actually give a certain education, even if she's in a refugee camp, what would happen if this woman would give an education that would say, you are empowered, my daughter, and you're not going to get married? So this is what I mean, is that we also can focus on women even more, and I thank Orla O'Connor also for being here. Thank you. That's it. That was a mini comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jim.
Hi, I'm Jim Clarkin from Oxfam and a proud member of the Gender-Based Violence Consortium. I think this is a very rich discussion and a very important one, but I'd like to challenge us a little bit about what we're going to do next. And there's a fantastic opportunity in Ireland in the next 3 months, which is an election. Let's get political. We have, it comes along once every 5 years, or sometimes more frequently, but 5 years at the moment. There's a really golden opportunity, particularly with the fluctuations in party support and with there's no certainty as to what the next government is going to look like, to make sure that gender equality is an electoral agenda item across the party political spectrum, and put challenges to the leaders and others in those parties to say, you know, we don't want nice talk about it. What are you actually going to do? What's your commitment in relation to the makeup of the next cabinet? What's your commitment in relation to gender budgeting over the next 5 years, etc.? And let's hear that, and let's get those issues right out in front of the electorate, and then let the electorate make the call and make sure that they drive this agenda, because there is no better opportunity, I think, here for the next few years. So I'd encourage all the organizations represented here, and individuals too, to put that kind of political pressure out there. And let's see that change embedded in commitments that are going to be made in the next few years.
Okay. Could I just abuse the position of the chair for a minute? And just in response to Jim's point, I think we do have a unique opportunity because of the flux in our parliamentary system at the moment. But we've just seen Trudeau do it in Canada, where he did come in with a 50-50 cabinet, and that can be done here irrespective of the results. I am sick of having arguments with politicians who say, well, enough women won't be elected to make them cabinet ministers. Many years ago, I don't know what year it was, Garret Fitzgerald wanted a particular man in his cabinet who wasn't elected, so he appointed him a senator and put him in the cabinet. Alexis Fitzgerald, back in maybe in the 70s, they can be appointed senators and brought into cabinet that way. There are ways around it if the determination is there. And I know the senator is going to have something to say to this, aren't you, Senator Keane?
Here's the mic. That Enda Kenny brought into cabinet indeed were women this year, and he has pledged.
Well, we're not going into a party political thing. We're staying above it.
Okay, right. All I can say is, speaking and make it political, as you've said yourself, there is that Fine Gael have pledged, and Enda Kenny has pledged.
No, that's party political.
Okay, I have
Senator,
pledged that 50% of the women in cabinet will be women next time.
Be women,
that's
absolutely.
on the record. On the record.
We need to
if
see
we
it
are
happen now
if we are in government.
We need to see it happen in reality. There's a gentleman just in front of Jim who is next. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. My name is Ejid. I'm from Waizesha. Bright, you said earlier that it will be good if we don't celebrate 15 years anniversary of the consortium. I'm afraid I'm a bit pessimistic because from my experience, about 2 years ago, or 1 year and a half, I've been engaging men on gender-based violence, migrant men, here throughout Ireland, men living in direct provision centers. I was really shocked because they were very deeply embedded into their cultures, and to change that culture is a very difficult thing. And they find it very challenging. First of all, a man coming to discuss gender-based violence with men, it was very shocking for them. And the response was, most of men, they either try to divorce their women because they find that women becomes very powerful when they come here because they are protected by the Irish system or laws, or some women, because they want to protect their marriages, they don't really, they try to protect the men who are violent still. So to challenge men who are really deeply rooted into their cultures, it's a very difficult thing, and we need really to still work hard on that. Yes, my work changed a bit the culture. And from that, every year, I've been going back to Africa, really working at grassroots level, as one of the participants said that. I've been living in Ireland for the past almost 18 years, and since about 5 years, I've been going every year in Africa, addressing gender-based violence. And the first time, and I was with my colleague Salome, even trying to bring up the discussion on gender-based violence with women, it was shocking. How can you discuss such thing? How can you, women themselves, it's a concept that's in existence. It's in existence. You cannot even discuss about it. And in one of the sessions last year, some men who came not as participants but as photographers, when they came to the session, they were shocked to say, well, all men should come to that kind of session. We are far, far, far away. Here, what the point I want to make is really the discussion, it's really limited at very official level, and it does not have an impact really at the grassroots level. And most of the people who are involved in discussion, they really just keep it in terms of discourse official, but in reality, violence against women, especially in Africa, I'm talking here from the point of view of Africa, it's a reality that's really far to be really addressed, and we need to work out. Thank you.
Probably generational. I'm going to ask Orla for a comment at this stage. We're coming right against the clock. We do need to vacate this room because there is a follow-on meeting. So I'm going to ask Orla for a comment and Anthony for a final comment. But could I just say, there will be a light lunch served in the front room afterwards, and some of the Malawi stuff will be on a rolling video, so people will have an opportunity to have a serious input over a light lunch. Ola.
Okay, thanks. I mean, there was a few things in that, and I think the point that yourself raised in terms of the pace of change, and are we still having the same conversation we were 20 years ago? And yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's a truth element to that. I mean, I do think some things have changed, pace of change well too slow, but also I think while it's happened in such a piecemeal and an ad hoc way and hasn't had the resources behind it, I think we really are at fault in terms of trying to implement some positive measures but not putting in place the resources that actually make sense. But what I do think, which is the worrying part or the negative part, is that on the other side, what has changed is some of the nature of violence against women. We're seeing, online abuse. I mean, this whole issue of stalking and harassment. So perpetrators and abusers have changed the pace and, have adapted to some of the changes that have happened. And certainly legislation and measures haven't done so to the same extent at all. And yeah, I mean, and I also think there's danger we could be sitting here in 10 years' time and having the same conversation unless we take serious action on all fronts almost simultaneously and put the money in behind it. And that's why I couldn't agree more with what Jim Clarkin from Oxfam has said. And for the National Women's Council, we're putting forward a manifesto and also a pledge for the election, and violence against women and the prioritisation of it is central to that, and we're saying it has to be central to the new government, as well as all the other aspects on gender equality. And just finally, I do want to pick up on a point that yourself raised, but it's that issue around, because it goes to the heart of what today's event is about, and that is about how we engage men. And when you were saying the bit about moving from perpetrators to partners, and I think it's really important that the work that we do in terms of trying to engage men has to come from a very strong analysis around violence against women and the fact that it's rooted in patriarchy. Because I don't think it is about moving from perpetrators to partners. It's about doing that work that comes from that analysis, and that's how we engage everyone in terms of working on violence against women. And in some ways, I think maybe it's less of a concern in these circles, but certainly we can see that the type of discussions that take place regarding perpetrator programs, for example, where they don't necessarily come from that analysis, is a real problem. So our work around violence against women has to be rooted in that, and everything else comes from that, I think.
Okay, thank you. Anthony, have you a final point you'd like to make?
Aside from just, again, thanking you for letting me be here, I think that the field, okay, we've been talking about it for a while, and I say we very fluently because I was not there 20 or 30 years ago, but I do think that as much as that is problematic in terms of it's not moving quick enough. The only thing I would argue is that that doesn't mean that we should have a knee-jerk reaction and have that work move too quickly. Again, when we're talking about changing culture, when we're talking about changing the way men and women relate to one another, when we think about the women's movement in and of itself, it never hit a fast track. It always took time, because that is not something that's easy. That's not saying that I think it should move slowly. That's saying that I think we need to be very measured in what exactly our messages are, who exactly the actors are who work on it, and making sure that do no harm is always up there first on the list. But that also inadvertently, again, we spoke about this a little bit yesterday, what we notice on the field is when you just have a really quick, inspirational type of a thing, oh, that's pretty easy to do. And if you let people leave the room and fill out a little sheet about what they feel about what Anthony said, they say things like, oh, all men should come to this is wonderful, this is incredible. And then they go back out to the real world. And then they're faced with the same patriarchy every single day, the same measures of them as men or as women, and it gets daunting. And a lot of the time, that's where the maintenance falls off. We can come up with a quick fix and pretend that the world is changing, or we can commit to more of a process that has that longevity to it, that quality work moving much quicker, as opposed to just quick work. And thank you very much for having me again.
We have to focus on the very, very, very early stages of education, because it will be a generational change. That's where it needs to start, and it will take time. But can I, on your behalf, thank the consortium and Rosamund and Deirdre in particular for organising today, and can I ask you to help them in their work by maximising the awareness generation as a result of today. Thank you all very much, and I hope you will stay for lunch in the front room. Take care.